Hey there everyone, good morning, afternoon or evening or wherever you happen to be. Welcome back to Bodhi Tree Buddhism. I think today we're on class number, it's either 14 or 15. It should be in the title of the video that you're watching now. And we're continuing on with the Dharma common to the five vehicles from the great classic, The Way to Buddhahood by Venerable Master In Shun. So if you are new to the show, you can, of course, join us at this point. You're welcome to, but you could also go back because we are kind of partway through a detailed discussion of a very comprehensive book about the entirety of the Buddhist path of practice. So you can watch now, or you can go back and watch those earlier videos. Please feel free to do so. See a bit of context. Or if you've been keeping up with us for all this time, then of course we're continuing on from, what we did last week. So without too much ado, let us jump on into where we're up to today. So as you can see, we are up to verse number 35. We've kind of gone on to a bit of a new section now. We're still talking about right view, which is the start of this whole section on the Dharma common to the five vehicles. Having a right understanding, having a correct understanding, of how the world works, and not just world in the sort of like external sense. We're not talking about like physics here, but we're talking about how living beings, humans in our case, but not always, how human beings and other living beings, exist in this world, and particularly those various, shall we say, dharmic laws, for want of a better term, affect us, how our actions create the very subjective world in which we live in. So the aspect of right view that we're up to today is the existence of the five destinies. I think I mentioned last time that many traditions have 6 destinies, some have 5. So the term here, destinies, is like, it often gets translated as realms, like the different basic categories of living beings. So from the highest form, we've got the gods, the devas. Then in the 6 destiny system, you have another one just below the gods known as the Asuras, which are kind of like titans. They're kind of like almost semi-divine, but not quite divine, very powerful beings. And then the next one is, of course, the human world, which is where we are now. And then below that, we've got 3 more. And usually the order is animals, so-called hungry ghosts or hungry spirits. And then the lowest one, the most painful of all these, is of course the realm of the hell realms. So let's just get into that. I don't need to talk about it independently because we've got all this content here within the text itself. So let's just read from verse 35. I think we might have done this last week, but let's just reiterate. 流转无曲中，身心多苦迫. Circling within the 5 destinies, the body and mind undergo much suffering and oppression. So this first phrase here, 流转, translated here as cycling, is, I said, another translation from this word samsara. And I think the way that we often think about samsara in sort of English language Buddhism, shall we say, and it's a bit like nirvana as well, because we use these Sanskrit words, samsara and nirvana, and people often talk about like in samsara or in nirvana, and it makes it seem as like there's this place and living beings like in this thing called samsara or in this place called nirvana. But while these are both nouns, it's also really, really helpful to think of both of them actually as in a verbal sense. So samsara is something that we do, we cycle, right? We are cycling around this act of going from one life and dying in some form after committing various actions, and then due to those actions being reborn in some other form, be it human or divine or whatever. This is the sort of action of samsara-ing. It's a much better way of thinking. It's something we do. It's not a place that we're at. And it's the same for nirvana. It's not somewhere that you go to. Nirvana is basically the extinction of the afflictions. It's this ending of afflictions rather than a place that you go to. I hope that kind of helps for the way in which people think about it. So this is what we do. We cycle life after life through various types of lives, 5 types or 6 types. It doesn't really matter. You can break it up into more detail. I mean, you can break it up into all the different types of animals, different types of humans, different types of gods. But this is just sort of a really basic kind of easy way of thinking about it. And in that process, both our physical bodies, sin, and our minds, xin, have various types of suffering and affliction. Now, another way of looking at these last two words, suffering and depression, or sort of affliction, is to think of them in terms of, we have physical pains, but we also have like emotional and mental stress and distress. Different types. Okay, so that's just kind of an overview, and then we need to move into like say, well, let's have a look at a bit more detail. What are these three? So first of all, we're going to have a look at the so-called 3 lower destinies. So the 3 lower ones are also sometimes known as the painful ones. This Chinese term is like kind of 3 almost like evil destinies. It's not that these forms of life themselves are evil themselves, but it's through unwholesome actions that one is reborn in these places. Sometimes they're also known as the 3 painful destinies because of the unwholesome actions that bring a living being there. They also, in general, experience far more stress and pain. So let's look at verse number 36. Sorry, I have to kind of look at this a bit funny because I've got my camera in front of my screen. 大地狱极热，金边偏有力，八寒极孤独，是诸苦终极。The great hells are extremely hot, the peripheral hells through which one passes, the 8 frigid hells and the solitary hells, these are the extremes of all sufferings. So the last sort of term there, the last line there, is maybe one of the most important ones. So of all the various types of pain and just suffering and torment, or various types of just even dissatisfaction that living beings can experience, that most extreme form is what in English we tend to translate as hell. Now, of course, hell is another one of these like English terms that is so strongly connected with Christian tradition. Now, it's kind of interesting as well, because even though we associate it now with Christian tradition, the term itself isn't really, shall we say, Mediterranean, Middle Eastern biblical. The term hell is actually, I think, it's some kind of like Scandinavian term. I don't know what language exactly, maybe Old Norse. And it's been brought into northern forms of Christianity through that kind of cultural amalgam of the northern so-called pagan religions and Christianity. Now, I don't want to go into, so what does the Bible say? What does actually sort of early Christianity say about what happens when one dies? Leave that for another day. But it's got various connotations. The Sanskrit term most common for hell is naraya, which means something like downfall. So, what that simply means is when one has a sort of an incredibly severe ethical downfall, where one, engages in very unwholesome actions, murder, rape, pillage, very, very nasty, very extreme forms, then they have a downfall. And in this process of cycling through various lives, they fall into this very, very painful experience. So that's maybe a better way of thinking about it. Don't get too caught up in the English word hell. Now, there are many different forms. It's not just sort of one place. It's many different forms. Of course, that depends on what actions one committed to get there. So the first thing it says is extremely hot. So this is kind of a common one. Particular forms of hell, hot and burning. But do note again, does that mean, you're sitting like in a barbecue and there's flames and fires? Well, sometimes even the term hot itself is used as just a general metaphor for suffering and affliction. If you look at the word klesha, affliction, in Buddhism. So we know through this process of karma, right, when we have afflictive states of mind, anger, violent intentions and greed and these types of things, these are the actions that then lead to experiencing these really painful results. And sometimes this word affliction itself actually means burning. So just going to keep that in mind. When you think of the hells are like burning hells, hot hells, this could in general just be this broad metaphor for pain. And that is a general term that we also use in English. They also have what are known as peripheral hells, which are sort of more short term. If you go into the text and look at all the various more detailed explanations, I'll give it a second. And then the third line is the 8 frigid hells, so it's like cold, and then solitary hells, where one sort of has these individual pains specific to one's own actions. Now, whatever the case, thinking about all these as a whole, one of the important concepts is the types of painful experiences one has correspond to the very actions that brought one there. So, and they go into all sorts of different details, and people that like murder people in certain ways then experience similar types of pain and suffering. This kind of general correspondence theory between karmic actions and the results of those actions. And I don't want to go into all the details, but some texts have this like incredible dealings, like pages and pages of these descriptions, very brutal and gory. I think when I was spending some time in Stanford, and we had a Sanskrit class, and the text that we were reading was these descriptions of hell, and it's like, I don't know if the hell was reading about the hells or the hell was learning some very intense Sanskrit. Not quite hellish, but anyway, very, very graphic. But one thing I want to say is, back to this idea of a lot of, say, Western practitioners of Buddhism, and how do we understand this? The texts themselves are quite, like I said, very graphic and very literal. Should we take it in that way? Or even this sort of real basic idea of like, oh, is that real, or is this just some kind of like mythical aspect that we don't really need to buy into in Buddhism? And it goes along also with this basic idea of a lot of people want to practice Buddhism but don't necessarily buy into this whole multiple lifetime samsara theory. Now, I don't want to give I don't want to say at all that this idea of hell just simply means, pain. If you go through some horrible trauma in your life, that is hell. I mean, we do use that term, but I'm pretty sure, even if we give quite an open interpretation to Buddhist texts and Buddhist teachings, it's not really saying that. It is saying it's not like just painful experiences that we undergo as humans. And when people see the really graphic descriptions, I'd like to point out, probably most of you watching this now, probably in the comfort of your homes or your wherever you may be, is very comfortable. Most of us in the developed world now are really in a very good position compared to general human life over the course of human history as a whole. It can be hard for us to imagine that kind of pain. But if you just think of something, even within the human realm, of the forms of suffering that we experience, some of them are incredibly traumatic. If you've done a bit of history, of course, you might read of something like the Holocaust. And I'm not just talking about the Holocaust experienced by Jews or homosexuals or many of the Slavic people and so forth under Nazi Germany, which is incredibly horrific. Many other forms have happened like this. Second World War is a bit beyond my experience. When I was a student in South Africa, I had a classmate who was from Rwanda, and so got to know him over time. Learned that he has grenade shrapnel and machine gun shrapnel. He's been wounded, and told the story of during the genocide in Rwanda. He and his family and whole community were hiding in a church, and I can't remember which of the other ethnic groups was attacking them, were just basically surrounding the church and machine gunning them and throwing in grenades. And he was one of the only people out of hundreds that survived. Just hearing that story, it's like, that is absolutely terrifying, that kind of experience. Or just recently, a friend of mine who's in Kharkiv, was in Kharkiv in the Ukraine. She's now managed to get out. She's in Germany, thank goodness. But before she get out, she was fairly late getting out of there. That was when it was fully under attack, and just a sort of description of being bombed and shelled. I mean, how absolutely terrifying. Now, that isn't Buddhist hell. That is still incredibly painful experience in the human world, but when you think of just how painful even certain experiences as humans can be, I don't think it's too much to say it can still even get worse. It can still even be worse than that. And so the important message to drive home here is simply that we may be in a very comfy problem now, and our problems might be third world problems. Oh no, the Wi-Fi is on the blink. Oh terrible. Or my Uber delivery person sent the wrong order. Oh, woe is me. But don't underestimate the potential suffering and how just incredibly brutal and painful that can be. And if we're in that state, our ability to say practice the Dharma or whatever is greatly reduced. Now, actually, in those two examples I just gave, to my classmate from Rwanda was doing seminary training. He went on, became a Buddhist monk for a while. And my friend from the Ukraine was, during that time, I don't know how she managed to do it, during that time, actually still going online and doing Dharma classes. She said it was the only thing that kept her kind of like mind in a semi-functional state. So that's the main message. Unwholesome, highly afflicted actions lead to incredibly painful results, and that's not something that we want to have happen to us. Okay. The next one is the verse on the animals, verse 37. 旁生种种意，吞啖取使苦. Animals are of many different varieties, which are made to suffer through being devoured or enslaved. So this is just kind of a simple, lots of animals, or many different, so many different types of animals, from, the higher, more intelligent forms, whales, dolphins, chimpanzees, and orangutans and the like, gorillas, highly intelligent creatures, right down to some very sort of low, plankton. Think of the tiny amount of like insects and worms and slugs and small animals in the oceans. There's billions and trillions of these various types of animals. But all through this in general, one very common feature for animals is simply, just trying to stay alive. I think often nowadays, maybe people that maybe live more in the cities don't really see wild animals that much, mainly only used to pets. People saying like, oh, I want to be reborn as a cat, or I want to be reborn as a dog, and you think you can just sort of lounge around the house and sit in the sun, meow at your owner and get fed. It sounds pretty chill, but from the percentage of animals that are well looked after pets is 1 in a billion from the animal world. At least 1 in a million. They're kind of like the gods among the animals, if we can make that analogy. But other creatures in general, it's just this sort of ongoing struggle to find food, stay alive, not get eaten. Just yesterday I went for a walk kind of near Port Meadows here on the west side of Oxford, and there's horses in the field and they just eat all day. Just all days eating. They're fine, they've got grass to eat, but if just eating takes up all of your time, we complain when we have to cook dinner, right? Oh, I have to cook dinner. It takes up so much time. Imagine if you just were literally spending all your time finding food and preparing food and eating food. Pretty difficult. Let alone, for many creatures, just trying to stay alive. On the walk home, past an area, there's this huge pile of feathers on the ground, and I thought, well, that looks to me like a cat's got a pigeon, maybe. And there's so many feathers, I don't think that pigeon survived. Something really simple. So another blackbird's eating a grasshopper. Well, that grasshopper isn't heading home. Animals, it's a tough world, just kind of staying alive. Don't get eaten. Don't starve to death. Don't, I don't know, all the other things that kill animals, so many things. It's pretty tough. It's a pretty tough life. And that's how they suffer. So it's different from sort of this hellish life, absolute torment, but it's pretty difficult. It's a pretty difficult life. The third type, verse 38, 恶鬼常饥渴，不尽以为食. Starving spirits constantly hunger and thirst, taking filth as their food. Now this class of suffering beings, I've translated here as starving spirits, is following the standard like Chinese term gui. Is literally hungry or starving. Gui is kind of like a ghost. Usually it gets translated as hungry ghosts. For me, I don't know why. Sometimes this expression hungry ghost, it sounds a bit too like cartoonish to me. I don't know why. It's just starving spirits. Now, actually, if we want to be a bit more technical in the Buddhist sense, there are many different types of these kinds of spirits. They're not like corporeal like animals. They're kind of, they can't be seen by regular people. Different types of ghosts or spirits. Some of them are in this hungry category, and part of this is this whole connection with the Indian idea that, and the very term itself that we're translating here as spirits, in Sanskrit is preta, and in the Indian languages this actually means fathers or ancestors, like one's forefathers. So the idea was that when one's, this is I know it's a very male-oriented theory here, when one's father or grandfather would die, you would have to do the Shraddha rites. So the son would do rites for the father to make sure that the father could be reborn, could go to the ancestors, in the world of the ancestors. And part of that offering would involve offering of food. So this idea then that the deceased are hungry and they require this food is all kind of linked in with this general notion here. So, how much of this is just kind of comes from this Indian cultural thing, or how much of it is this general idea of sort of disembodied entities. But most cultures do have an idea like that, but not all of them are starving. There can be many other different forms as well. But in this particular case, they hunger and thirst, but they can't eat regular food. They eat basically feces and urine and all these things of which humans would count as being like filthy, disgusting, unhygienic things. So that's their kind of suffering as well. And they also fight over that food. So again, you have this idea of like just fighting to stay alive, fighting to not be attacked or oppressed. And that is the suffering then of this class of beings. Third one, just to round all this out, verse number 39, 西有三不善，恶行之所感. All of the above are due to the three. Whoa, that's an important typo. All of the above are due to the three unwholesome roots brought about by evil actions. So, the unwholesome roots are states of mind. We've talked a little bit earlier about like wholesome karma and unwholesome karma. And we talked about the wholesome karmas and unwholesome karmas. What are those actual states of mind? So usually the three unwholesome ones are craving, or desire, if you will. Desire, aversion, and ignorance. And you can divide it up into more as well. There are other ones, jealousy, pride, and further break these up into more nuanced, unwholesome mental states. But these are the three big ones. Desire, aversion, and ignorance. And these three classes of beings, and one of the reasons why they're broken up into these three is sort of this association with the predominance of one of those three. So, the hellish realms, that is from actions dominated by aversion. And not just aversion, it's like anger and hatred. It leads to things like violence, murder, and the like. Very powerful, violent, hateful, negative actions lead to these hellish experiences. Craving leads to the state of being like the hungry ghosts. Part of the things of craving or greed is the sense of like insatiable, right? I want more, I can't get enough. Even if you've got 1 million, if somebody thinks it's not enough, sometimes you hear about this from maybe some person, as a politician or some corrupt business person that, suddenly made corrupt millions and then falls from grace, and they're like, how will I survive? They've still got a lot of money, but they feel insatiable. So this kind of idea there. And the third one, so ignorance, is the general way to rebirth as the animal. So animals, they're not, you don't usually call animals like evil, right? They just kind of follow their instincts, but they're also quite ignorant, relatively speaking, compared to humans. So these three classes of, the painful destinies, painful forms of rebirth within the cyclic existence, from the animals, the hungry spirits, and the hell beings are due to the three unwholesome roots of respectively ignorance, craving, and hatred. That's what brings them about. Okay, now the next part of the text here continues on into then the two higher destinies, the humans, the importance of the human realm, and that's a really important topic, and also the realm of the devas, the gods is our more common term. I think we're going to leave that for today though. We've already covered a fair bit here today, so maybe we can wrap it up. And just to sort of review today, so yeah, in Buddhist teachings, this idea of samsara is not like a place, it's something that we do, right? So long as we're engaging through our afflictive states of mind and these various actions, and so long as we still have this sort of self-centered view of the world and we're bound to that cycle, we're going to go life after life through various forms of existence. And that's this process of samsara-ing, cycling around through different rebirths. Now, during that process, if it's sort of a predominance or at that time of death that then these afflictive states of mind kick in, then there's this real risk of being reborn into the three lower destinies. And a really important point here is something, like you don't want to do that. That's really, really difficult situation where you might think, well, maybe you're reborn then, you're going to come back out again and be reborn as a human. But the big problem is once you're there, it's even harder to get out. As a human, we've kind of got the intelligence to know what we're doing or be able to reflect on the consequences of our actions. But once we're in those other states, often we're just so stressed by the pain and the affliction, it's very hard to climb your way out of it. It's really difficult to slip and fall down and not so easy to ascend. And it's not just kind of a matter of, it's not like, it's random that, you spend 20% of your time here and 20% here and 20% here and you just kind of go through and you will come back to the human world. No, that's really not a sort of a guarantee. It's not a given. So the preciousness of the human state is very important. So know about those negative states so you can do what you can to avoid them and stay in these higher destinies, the humans and the divine realms. Yeah, I think that's the main message for today, and that's all part of Right View, and we'll be continuing on next week with the section on the two higher forms and just continuing on through Right View and the rest of the text. So have a good day, take care, and I will see you all again next week. Bye-bye.